further north kind of ruled this place. In 1608, Samuel de Champlain settles Quebec or Quebec. In terms of the black portion here, I'm going to jump south. In 1718, NOLA. Anybody know what the NOLA is? New Orleans, Nolans, yeah, New Orleans, Louisiana. In 1718, blacks are going to build New Orleans from the ground up. It's a swamp with a bunch of logs. There's nothing there. They actually live on the islands off the coast for the first couple of years while they build New Orleans. Eventually, New Orleans becomes this really promising French colony in the Gulf of Mexico, and the French are going to employ slavery to use that to build that colony. They have what's called the Code Noir, yeah, the Black Code. If you get caught running away in that French territory, they cut your ears off. You get caught again, they put the fleur de lis on your neck. Is that what it's called? What's it called? Is that what it's called? Yeah? You get branded with that, yeah? So the French used slavery to build New Orleans, Natchez, Louisiana, that entire area. Just an interesting quick story there. The French are fond of dealing with an African group called the Bambara. The Bambara are nativists. They don't like Muslims. So they're always making war with the Mandinka, who are Muslims. So when the Bambara worked with the French, they captured Mandinka to sell to the French. Yes? So the French employ the slaves that they buy from the Bambara in Louisiana. So Louisiana had a lot of Muslims. Understand what I'm saying? There were a lot of Muslim slaves in the Louisiana territory in that region. So 10% of all slaves in America were Muslims. That's 40,000. A big portion of those were in the Louisiana area. In 1609, my favorite, I call him the Kaiser Sose. It's not really cool making Kevin Spacey references anymore. But the Dutch are the Kaiser Sose, man. They're everywhere and nowhere. The Dutch are the most responsible for building the new world. They are visionaries. They are futurists. They take capital and ideas and black people and turn them into industrialism. They don't really care much about anything beyond that. So in 1609, they settled New Amsterdam, New York City, right, the NYC. They do it using black labor. The Dutch East India Company and West India Company built this place. What's different about the Dutch? They use corporate slavery. So the corporations owned the slaves versus individuals. In New Amsterdam, they had half slavery. You worked half the day, and the other half the day you did what you wanted to. So a lot of brothers are going to work and get their freedom in that area. So by the time the English take over in 1664, there are a lot of free blacks in Manhattan and in that area. They built a wall to keep the Native Americans out. That becomes Wall Street, which we have today. Yes, yes,
yeah, I don't want to throw you off.
No, you're not gonna.
Were the African people aware of the value of gold and other precious metals before the slave trade was alive?
Yes. Yeah, gold, copper, silver definitely would have had a value within Africa, but also like cowrie shells, cola nuts, fabrics, a whole array of commodities that would have had value. It did not have the same value as it does to the Europeans. I mean, the Europeans are fixated on gold and silver, no question about that. So just to push through here quickly, the Dutch took Brazil from the Portuguese from 1630 to 1654. So they ruled Brazil. When they did that, they learned the sugar game, and they brought a bunch of Africans from Brazil into New York City. So a lot of those brothers were Congolese. So the Angolans and Congolese were some of the first blacks that entered into New York City at that time. One of the most famous stories is Anthony Van Salie. He's free. He's not a slave. He's a Muslim from North Africa. His father was a pirate, a white dude from the Netherlands who goes to Africa and turns Turk. He becomes a Muslim. He has a bunch of kids. One of them's Anthony Van Salie. Anthony Van Salie says, I'm going to make my fortune in the New World. So he goes to the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam with his wife. He sets up shop there. He's doing really well. He's a devout Muslim. But all of the writings say that his wife would get into fights with like bad people within New Amsterdam at the time. It's bizarre. So eventually they kind of shun him and kick him out. So he's like, whatever, I'll move. He moves to the adjacent island and becomes the first non-indigenous person to live on this island. They called it Turk's Island for 100 years. That was Coney Island. Coney Island was Turk's Island for 100 years because Anthony Van Salie was the first to live there. And Anthony Van Salie actually traces his roots, or genetically is related to Berry Gordy and Jackie Onassis. In 1610, the Spanish settled Santa Fe, so now we're heading out west. The Spanish used terms like mulattoes and mestizos. Mulattoes were Spanish and blacks. Mestizos were indigenous folks in Spanish. Out west, there's quite a few black people. Catholicism is their rule. Florida is controlled by the Spanish. So for a very long time, if you run away in South Carolina, if you run away in North Carolina, you're not going to run north. You're going to run south because you're going to run to Florida. Because if you run to Florida and you become a Catholic, the Spanish will free you over the course of a couple years. So you can get freedom by becoming a Spanish Catholic if you head to Florida for a very long time. So Florida becomes this, repository of runaways. That's why Andrew Jackson eventually goes down there, because there's thousands of brothers that have run away to Florida to join the Spanish during that time. William Alexander Leesdorf, another story for another day. Most people call him the first black millionaire. I think I jumped to the next question.
Are there any questions?
Yeah. Anybody want to?
I want to hear about the millionaire. Go back.
Want to hear about the millionaire?
Come on.
So go ahead, cuz. Go ahead, cuz.
All right, so I went to New York probably like last summer, and I went on a tour, and they talked about how Central Park was originally designed as a hub for African American people, and it was Central Park was like their neighborhood that actually ended up turning into. So we talked about how they came into New Amsterdam and settled. Is that a part of that settlement? And settling in Central Park and making their own destination of their own community?
So I'm not real good with New York City geography, but
I mean, that's like Manhattan.
no, I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. The Afro-Dutch neighborhood was very, very close to Central Park. About 110, 20 families owned a lot of land in that area when the British take over, and the British forced them out. And so we always talk about, like, the most valuable real estate on the planet today was originally owned by Afro-Dutch during that time, and that's exactly the region where they were. Doing a whole bunch of trades, farming, etc. So yeah, once the British come in 1664, they pushed all those brothers out of there, to take the land at that time. Just quickly, William Alexander Leesdorf, he is a Danish brother who is going to move into New Orleans to do business. His dad is white, his mom's black. He falls in love with New Orleans with a woman whose name is Mary. She's British. She discovers that he is really not Latino, he's black, calls off the wedding, breaks his heart. He buys a schooner, a steamer, sails that bad boy down the Atlantic, around Argentina, up the Humboldt Current, all the way to California. That's a heartbreak, right? That's a whole, and he named it after her, which is even more tragic, yes? He pulls into the West Coast just before the gold rush to a place called Buena Yerba. Buena Yerba, the Spanish call it. Today it's San Francisco. So William Alexander Leesdorf really founded San Francisco. He builds horse racing tracks, hotels, all these different amenities to attract all these folks that are coming in. He's friends with the Spanish, the Americans, frontiersmen, and he buys a ton of land along the Colorado River. He dies about 1845, before the gold rush. His land becomes the center of the gold rush. They have to go to the Danish East Indies to buy the land off his mother, which they basically steal. So we often call him the first black millionaire. Go ahead, Rand.
So moving along to the Revolutionary War, what did the Black Revolutionary America look like?
So we're moving to the 1700s. Okay, we're moving into the 1700s now, approaching the Revolutionary War. My daddy's state, Georgia, GA, Douglas County, founded in 1733. Okay, the last of the 13 colonies. It also becomes the place where a lot of loyalists, those who love the British, are going to set up. 75% of urban elites own slaves when we get to 1776. So here's something that's very little known. We associate slavery with the South, but as we approach the Revolutionary War, New York City is the second largest slave city in the country, only behind Charleston. Philadelphia, New York City, Boston, all these places have large numbers of urban slaves, and urban slavery is very different. It's not unusual that, especially in Boston, you're going to learn a trade, a diverse set of languages. It's more fluid. you have a lot more room to move in theory within cities. It's a very different type of slavery. In 1746 in New York City, there's a slave suspected revolt. A bunch of arsons take place, so they burn 10 people at the stake. But slavery in cities is very common in the North as we approach the Revolutionary War. There's something called Dunmore's Proclamation. It's funny. So Dunmore's Proclamation, when the Revolutionary War starts, Lord Dunmore, who is a loyalist, says, any blacks that run away, you're free. Find the British and you're free. And there's kids in here, so I won't say what I normally say, but people are running. Like 40,000 people are like, phew. And it's a lot of women and children, right? And you'd think it was the South that was most affected. Abigail Adams in Philadelphia writes John Adams like, yo, all the black people are gone. In Philadelphia, all the black folks ran away, even up north, right? So northern slavery is very common. By 1770 in Massachusetts, free blacks were growing in number. You could marry, you could own property. There's a suit in 1770 in Massachusetts where blacks are suing because they're paying taxes and not voting. Taxation without representation. That was happening in Massachusetts, 6 years before the Revolutionary War amongst blacks. There are a number of rebellions that take place in that time. We have 270,000 blacks alone in the Chesapeake by the time we get to 1770. And if we talk about the Revolutionary War, I often say, what side did black people fight for? What do you think black people fought for in the Revolutionary War? Is it vote because? Yes.